What's going on, Aquarium addicts? Kyle here, bringing you a video for two reasons. One, I just wanted to go ahead and show you guys where I'm at with my shrimp tank. Currently, I've basically got everything in place except I'm still waiting for this to cycle. And then I can also put my cholla wood in there. I'm pretty sure it's sunk by now in the water I've got it in. And then at some point, once the cycle's complete, or even I could get away with putting them in early, I'll go ahead and put my tangerine tigers in here. Like I said, I think that this tank was going to look sick with the sponge, the black background, and the darker substrate. It's not exactly black; it's more of a brown, as you can see. I don't know. My phone doesn't do a great job of showing the actual color of things. You know, it's a Samsung phone. It's going to be a little bit oversaturated, but it's clearly not black. Either way, I still think it looks pretty darn good, especially with it being set up now. And then secondly, I also want to get into the second part of my video series. But first, I just wanted to say that, I don't know, I've been feeling a little bit under the weather today. I woke up and I have just felt nauseous. And I'm pretty sure I got that bug that's going around, that flu bug. Not great. I hate getting the flu. And then my mom's like, "Oh, you should have gotten the flu shot." That's a little bit questionable too, because you know, the flu shot might cover you at the time, but there's a reason why people have to get flu shots every single year, because the virus mutates that often. So it might protect you for a little while, but then it'll mutate and it'll still get you. Anyways, but yeah, let's stop talking about sciencey stuff, nerdy stuff. Let's talk about a different kind of nerdy thing. Let's talk about fish tanks, or shrimp tanks, or saltwater, freshwater, whatever kind of tanks you're interested in getting into. So if you haven't already, go check out the first part of the series. I know I uploaded that like 2-3 months ago, but hopefully you've already watched that. If not, go back and watch that. If you're familiar with this hobby, it might not be super important, but yeah, maybe go check it out anyways. But what I want to talk about today is the different components that you need to get started with your very first tank, or with any tank really. So obviously you need the tank. Hopefully you've already decided on what kind of tank you want, the size and whatnot. For me personally, I have a couple 10-gallon tanks, you know, real small, real easy. Well, maybe not real easy, but they're fairly easy because of their size. You know, maintenance is pretty quick. There are pros and cons of having a smaller tank, that of which I will get into in a separate video, talking about different tanks and their sizes and their dimensions and pros and cons and whatnot. Hopefully you've got a tank picked out. Maybe you've already bought it. Next thing you're probably going to want, maybe not even totally necessary depending on what tank you want, but lighting is important with most tanks. So whether you want to grow plants or you just want to display your fish, you're going to want a fairly decent light. If you're looking to just display fish, not necessarily growing plants, let's say you got plastic plants and whatnot, then you don't really need any specific lighting. Just something that, for you personally, you enjoy. You know, you like the look of it. Whereas with plants, you know, with the freshwater planted tank, you're going to want something that's about the 5,000 or 6,500 Kelvin rating, which basically is just kind of the color spectrum of the light that's coming out. For plants, they look green because they're using the red and blue wavelengths. I won't get into that specifically right now. You know, again, it'll be a separate video. You know, with these different components, with the different aspects, I'll make separate videos for each of those, because I don't want any one of these videos to be too long. But you want something that's in the 5,000 or 6,500 Kelvin range because of the colors being emitted. And for saltwater, it's going to be more around the 10,000 Kelvin range. So that's something to keep in mind when you're picking up some sort of light for your tank. I'm using a CFL, a compact fluorescent light, which is a little bit more efficient, still fairly bright. The most efficient lighting is going to be LED. Maybe you don't want to spend a lot of energy, maybe you don't want to use a lot of energy and spend a lot of money on lighting. You could certainly go with CFLs or LEDs, or else if you're also looking for good lighting, you can't go wrong with tubes. So I've got a T5 high output light right here. I could put 2 tubes in that fixture that's sitting on top there if I wanted to, but I've only got 1 because if I use 2, it's a little bit bright, and I'm not using CO2. It's not really a high-tech tank. But that's working out for me just as well as this, and this is going to be a little bit more efficient with energy consumption. Next, super important, filtration. So right here I've got a corner filter which does a pretty good job. When it comes to shrimp, you're going to want to use some sort of sponge filter. When you use something like a hang over the back filter and it's got an impeller and whatnot, the shrimp might get sucked up in the intake and then get stuck either back here or get killed by the impeller or something. With something like this, it's just a sponge. It's just one giant sponge. With something like this, it's air driven. So we got this tube that runs all the way back there connected to an air line, and so air is pumped into here, comes out obviously as you can see, and the water will follow it because the pressure, I don't know, it's either the decrease or an increase in pressure will kind of drive the water up with the air. I can't think right now which it is, but water will flow through and it'll flow out. With the filter, with your filter, you want good circulation with the tank. So with this, water flows and comes right back to the sponge, kind of completing that loop. I'm pretty happy with this filter. I got this from Swiss Tropicals. Not sponsoring this video, but of course, if they would like to, that'd be nice. And then also you have other options like a hang over the back filter, which kind of sort of does it externally, but at the same time it does take up a little bit of space in your tank. And then there's also canister filters, which is pretty much exclusively out of your tank. It's exclusively external, and there's sumps, and there's a bunch of different filter options. And then of course, your water source. So for this tank I'm using RO water, and for this tank I'm using tap water from my girlfriend's apartment. She lives in Milwaukee County, so what that means is she gets her water from the lake. I get my water from the city well, which is extremely hard because of all the limestone in the ground. So I literally cannot use my water. It is liquid rock. I'd pretty much kill most things if I tried using it. I might get away with some special cichlids, but that's about it. But my girlfriend's got some decent water that I've been using. Otherwise, yeah, RO water, remineralize, and it works just fine. Depending on what kind of tank you want. For most people, they're going to want a substrate. And I've got fluval stratum in here. This stuff will buffer your substrate, it'll buffer your water. Sorry, I can't even think today. It'll buffer your water, keeping the pH down below 7. Something like this. I've got fluorite in here, which does not do anything to the water chemistry. So whatever the pH is of the tap water I'm using is the pH of the tank. So with this, again, it'll be a separate video talking about the water parameters and whatnot, but with this, I can't even remember what my GH and KH is, but my KH, point is, my KH is not 0 in this tank because KH does help buffer the water a bit, but there is a KH of 0 in this tank, and I'm solely relying on the substrate to buffer the water. which then means at some point the substrate's going to be exhausted and I'll have to switch it out after like a year, maybe a year and a half. And I bought twice as much substrate as I needed, so I should be set for a little while. Side note, totally got distracted here, but you probably haven't seen this plant before. That's because my buddy Vang lives in the area. If you're part of the Planet Tank Center, Wisconsin Shrimpers and Plants, or there's just a bunch of different groups. USA Freshwater Shrimp, I think. But you probably, if you're part of any one of those groups, you probably know Vang. And I'm so very thankful to have him in my area. He was just selling a few different booses, and of course I went and bought one from him. The most expensive one he had, of course, because of its size for the most part. It's supposedly called a Super Brownie Boost, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And hopefully I'm not starving it yet, because there's no waste being produced. I'm not adding in any sort of nutrients. So let's see how it works until I get my shrimp in here. So yeah, got distracted by that. And of course there's going to be other accessories that you may or may not be interested in. But yeah, those are basically the things that you need to get going with your tank. The different physical components. Yeah, obviously you're going to want a little bit of patience. But yeah, that's about it. So thanks guys for watching. Make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe, and I will catch you in part 3.